Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. When you look up at the night sky, do you see a random scattering of burning gas, or do you see a book written by the Creator? Today, we are challenging the modern atheistic view of a silent universe. We are unpacking E.W. Bullinger's The Witness of the Stars, which argues that long before the Bible was written on paper, God wrote his plan for the world in the constellations. From the riddle of the Sphinx to the true names of the stars, we're discovering why the heavens might just be the oldest proof of God's existence.
It's a really profound shift in perspective, isn't it? We are so used to thinking of the stars in one of two ways. Either it's the domain of secular astronomy, cold, distant, accidental.
Just math and physics.
Exactly. Or on the other hand, it's the superstitious realm of horoscopes and fortune-telling, which most people dismiss. But what Bullinger does is he takes us back to a time before all that. Before the Greek myths, before the daily horoscope, he takes us to what he argues is the original intent of these celestial pictures.
And his core idea, his premise, is that they're a divine revelation.
That's the term he uses, yes. His argument is that they aren't pagan inventions that somehow stumbled upon some truth. He's saying they are the original truth, the primeval revelation that then became corrupted by paganism later on.
That is a massive distinction, a really massive one. Because usually the skeptic's argument, the standard atheist argument, is that religion is just an evolution of something more primitive.
Sun worship, star worship.
Right. Early humans look up, they got scared of the thunder, they saw shapes in the clouds or the stars, and they invented gods to explain it all. But Bullinger is flipping that entire script. He's saying the design, the meaning, it came first.
He's flipping it completely. The whole argument here is that the fundamental conflict between chance or, atheism, this idea that the universe is random and meaningless, and divine design, that battle is actually fought in the night sky.
How so?
Well, think about it. If the stars have a specific, readable, almost linguistic message that predates human writing, then the universe isn't silent.
It has a voice?
It has a voice, and it's been speaking from the very beginning.
Okay, let's unpack that concept. The voice of the stars. Because usually when we talk about nature, we talk about it being beautiful or, majestic, awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
But we don't usually say a mountain is speaking to us in full sentences.
Right. It's poetic, not literal.
Exactly. But you brought up Psalm 19 in your notes, and that seems to be the real anchor for this whole theory.
It really is the biblical anchor, yes. And Psalm 19 presents this fascinating paradox that I think most people just skim right over. It starts with, "The heavens declare the glory of God." We've all heard that. It's on posters.
Sure.
But then it says in verse 2, "Day unto day uttereth speech." And the Hebrew word there is naba. It means to pour forth, like a spring or a fountain that's just bubbling over.
So it's not a whisper. It's a gushing forth of information.
A continuous, unstoppable flow. But then, and this is the riddle, almost immediately, verse 3 says, "There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard."
Okay, wait. So it's a loud gushing voice, but it's silent. It speaks, but it has no words.
Yeah.
That sounds like a contradiction.
It sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? It's describing a form of communication that transcends audible language. It's not English, it's not Hebrew, it's not Greek. And the text goes on. It says, "Their line is gone out through all the earth."
Their line. What does that mean?
Well, that word line, Kev, in the Hebrew is critical. It can mean a measuring line, like for construction, or it can mean a rule or a heritage. But it can also refer to a string of text, a musical chord. It implies structure, a structured message.
So not just random noise, it's an organized communication.
Precisely. And this is where Bullinger connects the dots. He makes the argument that for the first 2,500 years of human history, from Adam all the way until Moses wrote the Pentateuch, there was no written Bible.
That's a point we often forget. I think that is a huge, huge gap in time. If you're coming at this from an atheistic viewpoint, or even just as a critic, that's a massive plot hole in the whole God story.
It is.
If God wants to be known, if he wants a relationship with humanity, why leave everyone wandering in the dark for 2.5 millennia?
That is the quintessential atheistic challenge. If God is real, why is he so hidden? Why the silence? And Bullinger's answer is, he wasn't hidden, he wasn't silent, he didn't leave himself without a witness.
The stars were the witness.
The stars were the first Bible. The patriarchs, people like Seth, Enoch, Abraham, they weren't just staring at pretty lights and making up stories. They were reading a prophetic book. Josephus, the ancient Jewish historian, he actually attributes the entire science of astrology to Seth and his children.
Really? Josephus wrote about that.
He did. He said they wanted to preserve this knowledge because they knew a great judgment was coming, the flood. So they inscribed it in great pillars of stone and brick to make sure it survived.
Okay. But here's where I have to push back a little bit. This is where the skeptic in me kicks in. How do we know they were all reading the same book?
A fair question.
I mean, if I look up at the sky, and you look up at the sky, we might connect the dots completely differently. It's a cosmic Rorschach test. I might see a bear, you might see a wagon, someone in another culture sees a giant spoon.
The Big Dipper.
Exactly. So isn't the zodiac just Greek mythology?
Yeah.
Isn't that where we get names like Hercules and Andromeda and Perseus?
That is the common assumption. And it's an understandable one. We look at the familiar names and we think, oh, okay, this is just Greek storytelling projected onto the sky. But Bullinger's counterargument is that the Greek myths are actually corruptions. They are distorted echoes of a much, much older truth.
So the Greeks didn't invent them, they just changed them.
They inherited a system and overwrote it with their own stories. And he points to evidence for this. He points to the zodiacs found in the ancient temples of Dendera and Esna in Egypt.
And how old are those?
Some estimates date them back to 4000 BC. That's long, long before the classical Greek civilization ever existed.
4000 BC. Wow. That puts us right back at the dawn of recorded history.
It does. And here's the real kicker. This is the piece of evidence that makes you stop and really think. The figures in the constellations often do not look like the patterns of stars they're supposed to represent.
Right, like we were saying with the Big Dipper. Everyone says it's part of a Great Bear, but it just looks like a soup ladle.
It's even worse than that. Take Ursa Major the Great Bear as a perfect example. In almost every depiction of that constellation, it's drawn with a long, sweeping tail.
Okay.
Now, I don't know how much biology you know, but bears do not have long tails.
No, they have little stubby ones.
They have stubby little nubs, unless it's some very specific, long-extinct species of space bear.
Which seems unlikely.
Highly unlikely. So this disconnect implies something incredibly important. The meaning and the names must have come first.
What do you mean?
The pictures were drawn around the stars to preserve a doctrine, a teaching. They weren't drawn because the stars actually look like a bear. The stars were just a mnemonic device for the story, not the inspiration for the shape.
So someone had a story to tell, a theological one.
Exactly.
And they just hung that story on the stars so it would be preserved and passed down through generations.
It was a celestial memory palace. If the Greeks had just looked up and decided to draw a bear, they would have drawn a bear without a tail. The fact that the bear has a long tail suggests the stars in that tail were part of a sentence, part of the original message that had to be included, regardless of the anatomical absurdity.
That is actually a really compelling point. I've never thought of it that way. The picture serves the story, not the other way around.
Precisely. And this brings us to the structure of the story itself. If this is a book and the sky is the page, where do we start reading?
That's a good question. A circle, like the zodiac, has no beginning and no end. You can just jump in anywhere.
You can. We start our calendar year in January with Capricorn. The astrological year usually starts in spring with Aries. So where does this book of the stars actually begin?
So where does Billinger say the story starts?
He says the key has been staring us in the face for millennia, literally carved in stone in the Egyptian desert.
Don't tell me.
The Sphinx.
The Sphinx.
Yeah.
The big stone monument with the missing nose. How does that fit in?
The very same. Think about the form of the Sphinx. What is it?
It's got the head of a woman and the body of a lion.
Exactly. Bullinger argues this isn't just some random monster. It's a timestamp. It's an instruction manual. It tells you where the circle joins. If you look at those ancient zodiacs, like the one from Dendera, there is often a distinct break in the cycle, right where the Sphinx is placed.
Rick.
A start and a finish. You begin with the head of the woman, which is the constellation Virgo, and you end with the body of the lion, which is the constellation Leo.
Wait a second. That actually makes a weird amount of sense. Virgo and Leo are right next to each other in the zodiac.
They are.
So the Sphinx is basically a giant bookmark saying start here, end here.
That's the argument. Precisely. And if you do that, if you start with Virgo and end with Leo, the entire celestial circle suddenly stops being a random collection of animals and heroes.
It gets an order.
It breaks down into 3 distinct books or volumes, each telling a specific part of a single overarching redemption story. It becomes a linear narrative.
Okay, I'm hooked. You have my full attention. Let's open book 1. If we start with Virgo, What's the opening line of this celestial Bible?
So book 1 is all about the Redeemer, the prophecy of the incarnation, the person of the Savior. And yes, it starts with Virgo. Now, in Hebrew, the name for the constellation is Bethula, which means quite literally a virgin. In Arabic, it's Adara, which means the pure virgin.
So the concept of virgin is baked into the ancient names themselves across different cultures. It's not just the picture of a woman.
Correct. It's in the linguistic DNA of the sign.
Then-
But the detail that really seals it, the detail that goes beyond coincidence, is the brightest star in the constellation. We know it today as Spica.
Speak in Latin. Doesn't that mean an ear of corn or grain? That's why she's always drawn holding a sheaf of wheat.
It does. But the ancient Hebrew name, the pre-Latin name, is Semic.
And what does semic mean?
It means the branch. And this is absolutely crucial because the branch is one of the most specific and repeated messianic titles used by the Old Testament prophets.
Isaiah, Jeremiah.
Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Zechariah. Behold, I will bring forth my servant, the branch. The star picture is a woman holding what looks like a branch of grain, a seed. But the name of the star tells you it's not about agriculture, it's about a person. The branch of Jehovah coming from the seed of the woman.
And that connects directly back to Genesis chapter 3, the very first prophecy in the Bible. The promise of the seed of the woman who will one day crush the serpent.
It's the beginning of the whole story. And if you look at what are called the decans, these are the 3 minor constellations associated with every major sign, it gets even more specific.
Okay, let's define decan quickly for anyone listening who hasn't, taken an astronomy class since high school.
Sure, it's pretty simple. The zodiac is divided into 12 houses or signs. But the ancients divided the entire sky into 48 constellations total. So each of the 12 main signs has 3 side stories or decans that are associated with it. They basically clarify or expand upon the meaning of the main sign.
Got it. Chapter headings. So what's the side story, the first decan for Virgo?
The first decan is called coma. Now, this is one of the most fascinating examples of corruption in the entire sky. If you look for coma on a modern star chart, you'll find coma Berenices, which translates to Berenice's hair. It's depicted as a wig.
A wig. In the sky. That's a bit anticlimactic for the cosmic Bible. A divine wig.
It's the result of a later, much more mundane Greek story. The legend goes that Queen Berenice of Egypt sacrificed her beautiful hair to the goddess Venus to ensure her husband's safe return from war.
Okay.
The hair then mysteriously disappeared from the temple, and the court astronomer, probably to save his own life, pointed to this faint cluster of stars and said, "Look, the gods were so pleased they took the hair and placed it in the heavens."
That is the ultimate, the dog ate my homework excuse. And it worked.
And it worked. For 2,000 years, we've had a wig in the sky. But the ancient name coma has nothing at all to do with hair. In Hebrew, it means the desired. And if you go back to those ancient Egyptian zodiacs, like the one at Dendera, this constellation isn't a wig.
What is it?
It's a woman holding and nursing an infant child.
A woman nursing a child. So the classic nativity image. The virgin and child.
It is. The desire of all nations, as the prophet Haggai calls the Messiah. Bullinger even makes a fascinating suggestion that the Star of Bethlehem that was seen by the Magi wasn't a comet or a planetary conjunction.
What was it then?
It was likely a new temporary star, a nova or a supernova, that suddenly flared up within this very constellation of Coma, a new star appearing in the sign of the infant.
That ties the astronomy directly to the New Testament narrative in a way I've never heard before. So you have the virgin and the child right there at the beginning. What comes next in the sequence of Book 1?
The next sign is Libra, the scales.
The scales of justice.
You think of it that way, yes. Or maybe weighing crops at the harvest. But in this narrative, it represents something much more specific. It represents the deficit of human sin.
The deficit. How do you get that from a set of scales?
You get it from the ancient star names. The brightest star in the lower scale is called Zubin el-Janubi.
Zubin el-Janubi.
And it means the price which is deficient. It represents man's spiritual state. We are weighed in the balance and found wanting. We simply cannot pay the price we owe.
That's pretty bleak.
It is. Until you look at the upper scale, the star there is called Zubin al-Kamali,
Yeah, that means
the price which covers. It's the concept of atonement right there in the stars. One scale shows the debt we can't pay, the other shows the payment that covers that debt.
so the problem and the solution in one image.
Exactly. And the decans of Libra tell us exactly what that payment is, what the currency is.
Okay, so what are the decans for Libra?
The first one is a constellation called Crux. the cross.
Wait, you mean the Southern Cross? I thought that was just a navigational tool for sailors in the Southern Hemisphere. You can't even see it from places like Jerusalem or Babylon.
You can't see it now. But this is where orbital mechanics and deep time come into play. There's a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes.
The Earth's wobble.
Exactly. Imagine the Earth as a spinning top. As it spins, it has this very slow wobble that takes about 26,000 years to complete one cycle. And this wobble changes which stars are visible from different latitudes over thousands of years.
So the night sky looked different 4,000 years ago from the same spot on Earth.
Significantly different. And Bullinger points out, and modern astronomy software confirms this, that around the time of the biblical patriarchs and even up to the time of Christ, the Southern Cross was visible. It would have been sitting just above the southern horizon as seen from the latitude of Jerusalem.
No way. The cross was literally part of the story, visible in the sky.
It was part of the story. A cross right there in the sky connected to the scales of payment.
That is wild. The cross was hanging over the horizon.
And right next to it is the second deacon, Lupus. We call it the wolf today, which is another corruption.
Right.
The ancient name was Victima.
Victima as in victim.
The victim. This constellation depicts an animal being pierced and slain by the centaur.
A victim being slain to pay the price shown in the scales.
Exactly. And the third part of the story is Corona, the crown.
So the cross, the victim, and the crown.
The crown bestowed after the cross is endured. It's a perfect theological sequence. You have the insufficiency of man shown in the scales, the atoning death shown by the cross and the victim, and the glory that follows, which is the crown.
It's just amazing how consistent the theology is with, the New Testament, considering this was supposedly written thousands of years prior.
It is.
It's basically the entire Gospel of Mark told in stars.
And that's the core of the whole God versus atheism argument here. If this is all just chance, if it's a random collection of myths, it's a statistical miracle.
The odds are staggering.
But if it's design, then it means God has been broadcasting the core message of the gospel since the foundation of the world.
Okay, so we have the person of the Redeemer in Virgo and the price of redemption in Libra. What happens next in Bitch 1?
What happens next is conflict. We move into the signs of Scorpio and Sagittarius. This section is the visual representation of that primal prophecy back in Genesis 3.15, that the serpent would bruise the heel of the Messiah, but that the Messiah would ultimately crush the serpent's head.
Right. The great spiritual battle played out in the sky.
And Scorpio, the scorpion, is the enemy. It is depicted seeking to wound. The heart of the scorpion is that massive red star, Antares.
Antares.
That name means wounding, or sometimes the rival of Mars, the god of war. It represents the enemy's malice. But look at who the scorpion is actually attacking.
It's not just floating there, is it? It's trying to sting the foot of the guy above it. That's Ophiuchus, right?
Yeah.
The guy wrestling the snake.
Yes, Ophiuchus, the serpent holder. He is a powerful man, wrestling a massive, the constellation serpents, which is trying to reach up and grab that crown, Corona, that we just talked about.
So the snake wants the crown.
Snake wants the crown. But while Ophiuchus is struggling with this serpent, look at his feet. One of his feet is planted directly on the heart of the scorpion, crushing it. But his other foot, his other heel, is being stung by the scorpion's tail.
It's the bruised heel and the crushed head. It's almost too literal to be believed.
It's perfectly visualized right there. And Ophiuchus is often associated with the next sign, Sagittarius, the archer, who is depicted as a centaur.
Okay, a centaur, half man, half horse. Now that sounds like Greek mythology creeping back in for sure.
And that's the common view. But Bullinger argues that even this has a deeper meaning. It depicts the dual nature of the Redeemer.
God and man.
Fully God, fully man. This powerful being, the centaur, is an archer. And where is his arrow aimed?
Let me guess.
It's aimed directly at the heart of the scorpion. It is a picture of the final fatal blow being delivered to the enemy.
So that wraps up Book 1. The promise in Virgo, the price in Libra, and the great conflict in Scorpio and Sagittarius. A complete story arc.
Precisely. And that brings us to Book 2, The Redeemed. The first book was all about the Savior. This book is about the people he saves. And this section of the sky spans from Capricorn all the way to Aries.
Okay, starting with Capricorn, the sea goat. Now, I have to admit, this one has always been the weirdest for me. A goat with a fish tail. It just feels like someone ran out of animal ideas. What do we have left? Goat? No fish, let's just, jam them together.
It does seem absurd on the surface. It looks like a mythological mistake, until that is, you look at it through the lens of redemption theology. What is a goat in the Old Testament?
A sacrificial animal.
It's a goat, a sacrificial animal. And if you look at the constellation, the goat part is dying. Its head is bowed, its front leg is folded under. It is in the very act of falling in death.
Okay, a dying goat. Sad.
But look at the tail. Out of the dying body of the goat comes the strong, living, vigorous tail of a fish.
And what do fish represent in this symbolism?
In biblical symbolism, fish almost always represent the multitudes of believers. Think of Jesus saying, "I will make you fishers of men." The fish was the symbol of the early church.
Dikithis.
Right. So the picture in Capricorn isn't a monster. It's a theological diagram of resurrection and new life.
Life out of death.
Life out of death. The sacrificial goat dies, and out of that single death springs a multitude of living people, the fish. It solves the riddle of the chimera completely.
That is actually a really beautiful image. I'll never look at Capricorn the same way again. The sacrifice creates the believers.
And it flows perfectly into the very next sign, which is Aquarius, the water bearer.
Right, the man pouring out a jug of water.
Yes. But note very carefully where he's pouring it. It's not just onto the ground. He is pouring this endless stream of water directly into the mouth of a fish.
Which fish?
Specifically, the constellation Piscis Australis, the southern fish.
So the fish is drinking the water.
It's a perfect image of the pouring out of the Holy Spirit, the living water, upon the redeemed. I will pour water on him that is thirsty, the prophet Isaiah says. The star names here are just fascinating. The brightest star is Sa'ad al-Milik, which in Arabic means the record of the pouring forth.
Wow.
It's the living water being given to and sustaining the redeemed people of God.
Okay, so we have the creation of the redeemed through sacrifice in Capricorn, and then the blessing of the redeemed in Aquarius. Then comes Pisces, 2 fish this time.
2 fish, and they're connected by a long cord or a band. This is very significant. You have 1 fish swimming horizontally along the path of the sun, the ecliptic. This represents the earthly calling of God's people, Israel, for instance. Then you have another fish swimming vertically, straight up towards the celestial North Pole. This represents the heavenly calling, the church.
But they're tied together. They're bound by this cord.
They are, and the band, as it's called, is a distinct constellation itself. And interestingly, this band is attached to the neck of a monster.
A monster.
Cetus, the sea monster, Leviathan.
Wait, so the fair, the redeemed people, are bound to a sea monster. That sounds like really bad news.
It represents the bondage of the redeemed. While they're on Earth, they're still tethered to the world, to the enemy, waiting for their full and final deliverance.
They're blessed, they're multiplying, but they're not yet fully free.
Exactly. And this sets up the dramatic conclusion of Book 2 with the next sign, Aries.
Aries, the ram.
The ram. But look closely at the posture of the ram in the ancient charts. He's not passive. He's alive, vigorous, and he has his front paw placed directly on the band that binds the 2 fishes.
He's breaking the bond. He's stepping on it.
He is the breaker. That's actually one of the specific titles of the Messiah in the book of Micah, chapter 2, verse 13. The breaker has come up before them. Aries is the Lamb of God, yes, but here he is the triumphant ram who breaks the chains and sets his people free.
And you mentioned there are women in this section of the sky too, Andromeda and Cassiopeia. How do they fit into the story of the redeemed?
They are the deacons, the clarifying side stories, and they are a matched pair. It's a before and after picture. First, you have Andromeda, who is the chained woman. She is bound in chains, suffering, helpless, exposed to that same sea monster, Cetus. She represents the redeemed in their earthly state of affliction and suffering.
The church militants suffering on earth.
Exactly. But then you look up and you see Cassiopeia,
The queen in her chair.
the enthroned woman. It's the same woman, but now she is free. She is crowned. She is seated on a throne, making herself beautiful and ready. She represents the redeemed in their glorious heavenly state, the bride preparing for the coming of the bridegroom.
So from bondage to enthronement.
The complete story of the church, all thanks to the ram who breaks the chains.
It really is an incredibly cohesive narrative. It feels like reading a trilogy, with each book building on the last.
It is a trilogy, and we're now entering the final volume. Book 3, The Triumph. This covers the constellations from Taurus to Leo, and the whole tone changes here. It's no longer about promises or suffering or sacrifice. It's about judgment and final victory.
And it kicks off with Taurus, the bull.
The bull. Now, the first thing to do is forget the image of a domesticated farm animal, Ferdinand the bull smelling flowers. The Hebrew word here is reem, which describes a wild ox, an untamable, fierce, powerful creature. The constellation depicts a bull charging forward with its horns lowered.
So this isn't a gentle farm animal. This is a freight train with horns.
Exactly. It represents the Lord coming in wrath and judgment. And again, the star names tell the story. The bright red eye of the bull is the star Aldebaran.
Aldebaran.
It means the leader or the governor. Then you have the Pleiades, that famous little cluster of 7 stars on the bull's shoulder.
Everyone knows the Pleiades. It's the logo for Subaru, right?
That's the one. The word Pleiades means the congregation of the judge.
So the saints are with him.
The idea is that the Lord is returning, rushing forward in power, and his saints, the congregation, are with him, safe on his shoulder, while he charges against his enemies.
That is a terrifying image if you're the one standing in front of the bull.
And it gets even more intense with the main deacon of Taurus, which is perhaps the single most glorious and recognized constellation in the entire night sky, Orion.
Orion the hunter. You can't miss him in the winter sky. The belt is unmistakable.
Indeed. But he is not just hunting rabbits or bears. In this spiritual reading, Orion is the coming prince. His name comes from a root that means light breaking forth. He is the glorious appearing of the returning king.
Can you describe the visual for us? Because, like I said, most of us just see the belt.
Well, he wears that brilliant belt. In one hand, he holds a lion's skin, symbolizing his victory over the lion of sin and death. In his other hand, he holds a massive club raised up to strike. And his foot, this is the key, his leading foot is raised and placed directly over the head of the enemy.
Which enemy is that?
The constellation Lepus, the hare. Now, modern astronomy calls it a hare, which seems a bit silly for a great hunter. But in the ancient Persian and Egyptian zodiacs, it was often depicted as a serpent or a generic enemy figure. Orion is the final fulfillment of the Genesis 3 prophecy. He is crushing the head of the enemy.
And the stars in Orion itself, the names, do they support this interpretation?
Absolutely. The bright red star in his shoulder, Betelgeuse, means the coming of the branch.
There's that name again.
There's that name again. The brilliant blue star in his foot, Rigel, means the foot that crushes. And another star in his leg, Siph, means bruised.
So even in his glory, the record of his own bruised heel remains as a memorial.
Precisely. And there's a river flowing from him, right?
Yes, the constellation Eridanus, the river of the judge. It flows forth from Orion's crushing foot. It's depicted as a river of fire.
In the Bible, the prophet Daniel describes a fiery stream that issued from before the throne of the Ancient of Days. This is that river. It represents fiery judgment flowing down upon all the wicked.
Man, this is getting so intense. We've gone from a gentle, nursing mother in Virgo to a river of fire flowing from a cosmic warrior.
That is the trajectory of history, according to this celestial view. It moves from grace to judgment. And that brings us to the grand finale, the end of the book. The lion, Leo.
The Lion of the tribe of Judah.
Precisely. Leo completes the great circle. We started with the promise in the Virgin. We end with the triumph in the lion. Leo's the king, resting after his victory, pouncing on his prey.
And who is the prey this time?
It is Hydra, the fleeing serpent. This is a massive constellation that stretches across a huge portion of the sky, slithering underneath Leo, Cancer, and Virgo. Hydra represents the old serpent, the ultimate enemy, Satan himself.
And the lion is destroying it.
He is pouncing on its head, rending it. And there are 2 other little constellations right there that are just incredibly grim. Crater the Cup and Corvus the Raven.
The cup and the raven, what do they signify?
The cup is the cup of God's wrath, and it is placed directly on the back of the serpent as if its contents are being poured out onto it.
Pouring judgment onto the snake.
Exactly. And Corvus, the raven or the crow, is seen pecking at the serpent's flesh. It's the birds of prey coming to devour the flesh of the enemy, a theme you see in the book of Revelation. It is a graphic, final depiction of total and utter defeat for the dark powers.
Wow. So the riddle of the Sphinx is solved. The story begins with the incarnation of the Redeemer promised to the Virgin, and it ends with the complete and total destruction of evil by the lion.
Correct. It is a complete, self-contained theological system projected onto the canvas of the universe for all to see.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here one more time.
Please.
This is all very poetic. And the linguistic connections, the star names, are fascinating. They really are. But couldn't this just be an incredible coincidence? Humans are pattern-seeking machines. We're great at finding patterns. We see shapes in clouds. We find faces in toast. We read messages in tea leaves. Maybe we just found a gospel in the stars because we so desperately wanted to see it there.
That is a fair question. It is the question. And that is where Bullinger moves beyond linguistics and art, and he brings in what we might call the mathematics of God. He argues that the statistical improbability of this entire system occurring by chance is simply insurmountable. And he shifts from linguistics to orbital mechanics to prove his point.
How does he do that?
He points to the cycles of the sun and the moon. He calls them the solilunar cycles. For example, we all know about the eclipse cycle. There's a period called the Saros cycle. It's about 18 years and 11 days, after which eclipses repeat in almost the exact same order and location.
Okay, that's standard predictable astronomy.
It is, but Bullinger takes these known natural cycles and he compares them to the prophetic numbers found in the Bible, specifically the number 1260.
Wait, 1260, where does that number come from?
In the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, the number 1260 days, which is the same as 42 months, or a time, times, and half a time, appears over and over again. It's a very specific period of tribulation or judgment or the reign of the Antichrist. It's a key number associated with the end of the age.
Right, I remember that.
Well, Bullinger points out that 1260 years is also a precise astronomical cycle. If you calculate the positions of the sun and the moon, you find that they return to almost the exact same alignment relative to each other and the calendar year every 1260 years.
So it's a solilunar cycle.
It's a master cycle. And his argument is that the creator who set the perfect clockwork of the solar system in motion is the same author who wrote the prophecies in the Bible. The astronomy is designed to fit the theology. The clock matches the schedule.
So what you're saying is, it's not just that the pictures in the sky happen to look like the story. The actual gearwork of the universe ticks to the same rhythm as the Bible's prophecies.
That's exactly it. He implies that history isn't just one random thing after another. It's a geared mechanism moving toward a specific, pre-appointed conclusion. The stars are the face of that great clock.
So if the duration of something like the times of the Gentiles in the Bible aligns with the orbital mechanics of the moon, that suggests a single designer for both the book of Scripture and the book of the sky.
That's the argument. The fingerprint of the same artist is on both canvases. It's the ultimate argument against chance.
You know, that brings us right back to that feeling I talked about in the intro, that feeling of looking up at the sky and feeling, well, insignificant, feeling like it's just this vast, cold, dead space. If Bullinger is right, that feeling is actually wrong.
Well, the part about being small is true. We are small, but we aren't insignificant. And the universe is not silent. If this theory holds any water at all, the night sky is actually a library. It's a love letter. It's a promise.
It also completely changes the way you think about the ancient world.
How so?
We tend to think of them as primitive, you know, stumbling around in the dark, inventing myths to explain why the sun goes down. But this suggests they knew something profound that we've lost. They looked up and saw a book. We look up and see burning gas.
We have lost the literacy of the skies. That's a great way to put it. We have light pollution that physically hides the stars, and we have cultural pollution that hides their meaning. Bullinger's essentially trying to teach us how to read again.
I love that phrase. We have lost the literacy of the skies.
And think about the direct implications for the atheistic worldview. The primary argument for atheism is usually based on the idea of randomness, that we are here by a series of fortunate accidents in a universe that has no inherent meaning. But if the zodiac is a pre-written prophecy of Jesus Christ, written 4,000 years before he walked the earth, encoded in the very names of the stars from multiple ancient languages, then the argument for chance is dead in the water.
Because you can't have a detailed prophecy without a prophet, and you can't have a complex design without a designer.
Precisely. That's why the psalmist said, "There is no speech nor language, yet their voice is heard." If the creator went to such incredible lengths to write his plan in the very stars thousands of years before a single book was printed, what does that say about the excuse, "Well, I just didn't know"?
That's a heavy thought. It implies we are, in a way, without excuse.
It does. It suggests that perhaps the night sky isn't just there to be pretty. Perhaps it's there to be read. And perhaps the cold indifference we think we see in the universe is just a reflection of our own illiteracy.
We have really traversed the three books of the sky today. The Redeemer from the Virgin to the Archer, the Redeemed from the sacrificial goat to the victorious lamb, and the Triumph from the judging bull to the conquering lion. It's a lot to take in, but it will certainly make looking up at the sky tonight a very, very different experience.
It suggests that we are all living inside a great cathedral, and the ceiling has been painted with our history and our future.
This has been Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Keep looking up.